Hey everyone, Gill Gross here, and it is time for a preview of the 2025 Rome Masters final between Jannik Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz. Big show. Big day on Sunday. Needless to say. The most important rivalry in men's tennis right now, the most interesting rivalry in men's tennis right now, the two players who have split each of the last 5 majors. We get it for the first time in 2025. It's only the second time that they've shared the same draw in 2025 as Jannik Sinner comes back from his 3-month suspension and immediately reaches what is his 7th consecutive final, going back to Cincinnati last year. I want to start by setting the stakes of Sinner and Alcaraz, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the head-to-head. I'll walk you through my prediction for what we're going to see on Sunday. I'll even talk about the semifinals that we witnessed today, because those matches deserve to be covered as well. But first, let me set the stakes of Carlos Alcaraz versus Jannik Sinner right now. The question that I am usually asked when I'm speaking with people who aren't that interested in tennis, but they learn that I'm in tennis and they want to make conversation. The question I am asked more than any other question is, who's the best? That's the question when I'm sitting in the barber chair. Who's the best? And my response is always, Jannik Sinner, but. I'll get into the but in a second. But first, the reason I lead with Jannik Sinner is because he is on an all-time run, a historically dominant run of tennis right now. What he did last year, win percentage over 90, didn't lose a match in straight sets all season. One of the most dominant ATP finals championship runs in history. At the moment, he has won 40 of his last 41 matches. He just missed 3 months. He just went 3 months without playing, and he's still number 1 in the world by some distance. It has been a historically dominant run for Jannik Sinner. So that's why I say, first and foremost, Jannik Sinner is the best. Now let's get to the but. But Carlos Alcaraz has beaten him 3 times in a row. And I've got to put that on the end of it, because tennis is a sport in which it's mano-a-mano, and when one player is beating another 3-0 and it's close, albeit head-to-head, is not the end-all be-all. Ultimately, it's major titles in this game. I will always say that and always admit that. But that's why my answer is Jannik Sinner first and foremost, but this other dude who's also at the top of the game has beaten him 3 times in a row. So I say all this to express the fact that the result of matches like this, like the one that we are about to witness on Sunday, will drive the narrative of what is the most basic and essential question in all of tennis: who is the best? That's how important these matches are. Although, of course, if they play again in a couple of weeks, the result of that match will, that's what will be forever stamped in the history books. That's what result is going to matter and potentially overshadow this result. Right? When Djokovic beat Nadal in Rome and then Nadal won Roland Garros, suddenly that Rome result didn't matter much to Novak, I don't think, and didn't matter much to Rafa either. And we saw that a couple of times. So with the caveat that we know what the grand prize is here, it's in a couple of weeks, this is huge. And, man, it's been an impressive display by both, neither coming in with the most ideal of circumstances. I don't think anybody, and we'll talk about this more, I think, after on Monday, but I don't think anybody would say that it's fantastic to come into an event without a match in 3 months. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's also not necessarily what you're looking for. And for Carlos Alcaraz, nobody would say it's fantastic to have to pull out of Madrid with an injury. So there were some question marks, not the perfect circumstances, but they've navigated their way through in very impressive fashion. So let's get into that. We'll talk about the paths for each player, and we'll start with Jannik Sinner. It was Navone, De Jong, Cerundolo, Ruud, and Paul. I did a post-match on the Cerundolo match, so my thoughts are out there on that one. But let's pick things up with Ruud. Jannik beats him 6-love, 6-1. And the biggest thing here is the ripples that sends across the locker room. Because you talk about the Roland Garros tiers. You think about a guy like Alexander Zverev, Novak Djokovic, and let's keep going, Holger Rune, Jack Draper, Lorenzo Musetti. Like all these players who dream about winning Roland Garros. They know they're not the favorites. Maybe that's not the expectation for them, but they know that they're right on that outside of the top dogs. And of course, they are hoping that the disruption in Jannik Sinner's season is going to simply stymie the momentum and the freight train of results that we had seen up to this point. And as soon as they either watch that match or they check their score app and they see two-time Roland Garros finalist Casper Ruud love and one, I don't care how dominant the head-to-head has been, for that to happen on clay to Ruud, love and one, you better believe that Zverev's shoulders slumped, Novak's shoulders slumped. Like, oh, okay. Sinner is maintaining his aura of invincibility that he left off with a result like that. And look, what happened in the match, I'm not going to overcomplicate this, there's so much to talk about. I'm not going to get too much into the weeds here, but Casper can't seem to hit his rally ball without getting absolutely blitzed. Like he can't trade his forehand cross court or his backhand cross court. Ruud is not the biggest depth guy. He's more of a spin guy. And maybe it would have helped him if it was hotter, if it was during the day. But hey, whatever it was, that ball was jumping into Sinner's hitting zone, and Jannik was taking it at its apex and just timing it up with brutalizing precision time and time again. And Ruud was just on the back foot constantly because he couldn't hit his rally ball. He was getting crushed in the court positioning. Sinner was taking the ball off of hard and early off of both wings in every direction, and Casper was getting demolished just from the offensive ground game of Sinner, the power ground game of Sinner. And it was just as perfect pretty much as you can possibly play a match from Jannik Sinner's perspective. I know that, most people who listen to this podcast are probably aware of the Tennis Insights performance ratings. That was the highest of the year in 2025. That tracks things like how often are you making the ball? How hard are you hitting the ball? How close to the corners are you playing the ball? All of those raw ingredients that go into, their shot quality algorithms. That was the highest score of the year for Jannik Sinner. No, sorry. Let me be clear. That was the highest score of the year for anybody all season long in all the matches that they track, which is most of them. All right. Okay, then in the semis, it's Tommy Paul. You know that this is going to be a completely different matchup for Jannik. Okay, because Tommy is not a rhythm player. Casper is. Okay, Ruud, for as great as he is, he's not going to be super unpredictable. And he's going to trade ground strokes with you from the back in a way that, makes Jannik Sinner feel really comfortable. But Tommy plays off pace way more often. Tommy's backhand is low and flat, which is the polar opposite of Ruud's, which is high and spinny. Tommy looks to take the ball early and come in rather proactively. Ruud doesn't do much of that. Tommy's directionals are, tend to be a little bit more unpredictable. Ruud was a little bit cross-court heavy against Sinner, and part of that was because he was absorbing insane pace and probably didn't feel like he could change direction. But Paul tends to spread it around a little bit more, higher down the line rates. It's tougher to square where he's going. And Tommy Paul played Sinner extremely well at the U.S. Open last year. Couple of tie breaks in the opening 2 sets. So there was plenty of reason to believe that Tommy was going to be able to sink his teeth into that match a little bit better than Ruud did. And he did. In fact, Tommy Paul won the first set 6-1. Sinner won the next 2 6-0, 6-3. This continues, before I get into it, this continues what has been a bizarre pattern for Tommy Paul. Very bizarre. Last year versus Medvedev, he won the first set 6-1. This was at Indian Wells, by the way. Medvedev at Indian Wells. He won the first set 6-1. He lost the match 6-2 in the third. Wimbledon last year versus Alcaraz. He won the first set. He kept it very close in the second set. He lost 6-2, 6-2 from there. Sinner at the U.S. Open. First 2 sets were tie breaks. Third set was 6-1. Zverev this year at the Australian Open. First 2 sets were tie breaks. He won the third. He lost the fourth 6-1. So what is this pattern that I've noticed? Tommy, when he plays the very best in the world, the top guns, things tend to go really well for him for the first 45 minutes to an hour and a half even. Like, he has started time and time again against top 5 competition, top 3 competition in some cases. He goes really well for a long time. And then, then you look at it and you think, well, how close was he to winning these matches? Not all that close. Not all that close to winning these matches. Albeit, he doesn't have a bad record against top 5 players in general. He's actually 7-15 in his career. That's partially because he went on a huge run in 2021 to 2022. He won 4 out of 5 for a stretch. Pretty remarkable. So that's part of the reason why he's 7-15 for his career. But the point is, things go really well at the start of the match. Then usually it just fades. That's what happened in this match. First set, the biggest thing was Paul's backhand. I know I mentioned it quickly, but it was handcuffing Sinner over and over again because Jannik was hitting backhands from his knees. And Paul was driving it hard, flat, deep, not a lot of net clearance. Like, he was just hitting absolute frozen ropes. Okay? Hard line drives. They weren't checking up. They were just kind of skidding right through the clay court. It's hard to do on a clay court, but if you hit it low enough and flat enough and hard enough, it's still going to come through the court. And that's what was happening in these backhand and backhand exchanges. Sinner just he couldn't do anything off of the ball. And Paul, off of the forehand wing, was totally redlining. He was going, just gunning every forehand possible. So the backhand was unattackable. The forehand was a huge weapon, which is what he usually does when he's a big underdog in these matches. Well, Paul, if you look at the statistics through the year, he's got one of the softest forehands among top players, if not the softest forehand among the top players. He's in that like Demon or Medvedev range. But then when you see him go up against Alcaraz and Sinner, usually he just realizes, okay, I got to rev it up, and he does. But how long does it last, right? So everything was going in the first set. Sinner gave away some cheap stuff in his service games, no doubt about it. But mostly it was Tommy playing incredibly and Sinner looking really uncomfortable with that Paul backhand. What changed? Well, Tommy had to come down to earth. He just cannot sit above his average ground stroke speeds, so far above them without missing for an entire match. It's just not going to happen. I thought in set 2, he lost a lot of the pace. In set 3, as soon as the set started, he tried to get the pace back. He did get the pace. He brought it back. And he started missing a lot. There was an adjustment from Sinner, though. I think Jannik was like, look, I gotta get this guy in more neutral forehand positions, however possible. No more like, he's trading backhand and backhand. I can't make any progress here. And then oftentimes I'm getting hurt. So you look to put him in as many neutral forehand positions as possible, where he can't attack, but he's hitting forehands, and that's the ball that's going to sit up in my more comfortable hitting zone. And forehand to forehand, that's what always concerns me for Tommy Paul in all of these matchups against the top players. I think he loses that exchange against most of the top players. And Sinner just had to find it more. How? By taking his backhand down the line more often, by finding ways to hit his backhand just harder in general off that low Tommy Paul backhand. One thing he started doing when Paul sliced, he started running around and hitting forehands basically every time, whereas in the first set, Tommy would hit the backhand slice and Sinner would kind of accept really like low ankle-high backhands. So he stopped doing that as well. And he was just so opportune. This is what Sinner did so well. When Tommy's pace dropped off a sliver, particularly on the forehand wing in the second set, Sinner was so opportune about making hay off of Tommy's forehand and just hurting him off of it. Paul's serve stopped generating short balls. It's another thing that kind of changed after the first set. And I think that was Jannik stepping up his game in the return category, but it's something that I expect in this matchup. It's something that I certainly noticed at the U.S. Open. That was a match where there were a lot of breaks of serve. But I don't think Tommy, especially on clay at night, I don't think he serves big enough to really bother Sinner's return. And I expect Jannik to neutralize Tommy's serve consistently. In the first set, a lot of short returns, and that dried up. That well dried up, which just didn't surprise me. The other thing that I notice is that Paul can't really get to the net. Let me see if I can pull up the stats actually for net points. My goodness. I mean, he was 4 for 6. 4 for 6 in a 3-set match. And I know it was a 3-set match where not a lot of games were played because it was a 1-6, 6-love, 6-3. But man, 6 times at the net for Tommy Paul. That's a tough number, but most of that has to do with Sinner. It's depth and it's court position. And if Jannik is doing what he does, which is keep the ball deep, his average, just rally ball ground stroke is so deep and so fast and so consistent, and he doesn't give you a lot of court position. He doesn't give it up on the return like so many players do nowadays, particularly on clay. Right? If Tommy was playing Alcaraz, it would be a different story. If Tommy was playing Musetti, it'd be a different story. If you were playing Zverev or Medvedev, it'd be a different story. Right? Sinner's the guy who kind of suffocates you a little bit more on the return of serve positionally. And then in the rally, like he's just not going to give you a lot of he's not going to give you an opportunity really to close in tight on the net. And he's not going to give you a ton of court to drop volley into. And he's not going to give you a lot of chip defense. When you put Sinner on the run, he tends to drive the ball. And that does not inspire confidence for a net rusher. But again, if Tommy Paul, I don't love Tommy's pure ball striking. I love a lot of the different things he does. I love him. I love his net rushing. I love his transitioning, and I love his return, and I love his speed around the court and his athleticism. But when it comes to just pure forehands and backhands, I don't think he matches up with a lot of the best players, a lot of the top 10 players. And now you put him against Sinner, who's the best pure ball striker. And that's trouble to me, that Tommy's only at the net 6 times. And I'm not saying he can do something about it, but I'm saying that's trouble against Jannik Sinner. So Sinner with his 26th straight win. He's won 40 out of his last 41. He has reached his 7th straight final going back to Cincinnati last year. Now let's move on to Alcaraz. He has taken out Lajovic, Gera, Khachanov, which was a tight one, a long one, Jack Draper in the semis, and Lorenzo Musetti. I did make a post-match video about the Draper quarterfinal. Let's talk about the Musetti match. 6-4, 7-6 for Alcaraz. And you start here with the fact that it seemed like Carlos handled the occasion a whole lot better than Musetti. Some bad early match nerves for Lorenzo. He was overplaying a lot. He was struggling to execute a lot of the basics, like second serve returns on big points, put the ball in play, right? That stuff was missing. The consistency wasn't there. Tough conditions to play well in. Very windy. Court was drying up quickly in the sun. A lot of bad bounces, it seemed. Part of that is the wind as well, just disrupting the court surface. But also it seemed like there were a lot of nerves. And that's why we got a racket smash in the first set, right? We got a broken racket in the first set from Musetti. And then we, fast forward to the second set, 4-all, ball abuse from Lorenzo to give up a point. Again, at 4-all, he spots Alcaraz at point 15-love. Not great, right? Musetti can struggle to get himself out of that negative headspace sometimes when things are going against him. And he struggled with that in this match. Then, just to round off this conversation, just about the mental side of things, 4-5 second set tiebreak. Awful drop shot decision. Probably decides the breaker. Razor tight margins. End of the set. It's anybody's set. Musetti had already saved a couple of match points. And it's a +1 ball. Not a great spot serve, by the way. Just a solid backhand return by Alcaraz that was just, it was a neutralizing return. And Musetti was off of his back foot on a runaround forehand. He hits an inside-out drop shot that Alcaraz, he gets there easily. He forces an error on a driven backhand cross court in tight on the net. And look, the return was deep. Again, Musetti was off of his back foot. Alcaraz was in solid position, right? He was just like 3-4 feet behind the baseline after hitting that return. On a second serve, by the way, I believe. So that drop shot just wasn't available. And on what ends up being the biggest point of the match, Musetti just makes a pretty boneheaded decision. So that is why I kind of begin there with the fact that it seemed like the occasion got to Musetti. But serve return, also an edge for Alcaraz. I thought the second serve returning was kind of the MVP for Carlos. He held Musetti to 27% second serve points won. And like sometimes you'll have a match stat almost mislead. Like let's say in the first set it was atrocious. It was 2-4-11. And then in the second set, Musetti fixed it. And he ended up at 50%. And then for the match, it still looks terrible, but it was only really a problem in the first set. In this case, it was actually 27% on the dot in both the first set and the second set. What was happening, Alcaraz was lighting up Musetti's second serve. He was standing pretty close. He was making clean connections. He was hitting really, really big. And it's so important because Musetti is such a great defender. A great defender is not a great defender after hitting a serve. Nobody is a great defender after hitting a serve. You can't cover the court because you're on top of the baseline. You've just recovered out of your service motion. So you're unlikely to be in great position to now absorb pace and defend. Plus, you're a little bit off center. Opens up some of the down the lines. Think about one of the break points, one of the big break points that Alcaraz converted down the stretch. Actually, I think it was at 3-4 to even up the second set at 4 apiece. It was an inside-in forehand return winner on the ad side. Musetti's not on center. Musetti's off center. And he's inside the court. And he's just hit a serve. So, again, one area where you can really sort of have a get out of jail card against a guy who defends as well as Musetti is crush their serve if you can. And they're not going to be that difficult to hit through under that specific circumstance if their serve is hittable. Musetti, among top 50 players, is 19th among in second serve win rate. He's 19th, which you might be like, oh, Gilly's above average. That's pretty good. Well, think about it. Musetti's one of the best baseline rally winners in the world. He is incredible from neutral, incredible from defense. One of the best players from the back of the court, period. So for him to be 19th, that tells you something about the serve itself. And for even further evidence of that, well, look at how he is when he's returning the second serve. He's 6th best. The fact that he's 19th on the serve, 6th on the return, when you're looking at the second serve, it tells you something about the dynamic of the serve versus the return itself. And Alcaraz took major advantage of that. Ultra deep return position for Musetti, which I usually like. I'm a big proponent of deep return positions, particularly on clay, particularly for a guy like Musetti. Why do I like that? Because against a big server and, all these big serve +1 guys, Lorenzo's going to neutralize the serve. He's going to make returns in play. He's going to be able to defend on that fourth shot and get himself in the point. He's going to be in great defensive position. So I like the deep return position. I just don't know if I like it against Alcaraz. It's the one guy who I just think, man, he's so good at dissecting it. He's so good at taking advantage of that open space. Medvedev has had to make the adjustment against Carlos Alcaraz. He's not standing on the back fence when he's playing Carlitos. Carlos, man, with his serve and volley option, his wide serve approach, open court, right? So +1 approach, open court, now he's at net. The +1 drop shot. All these things that he does probably better than anybody else makes it really difficult to assume a deep return position against him. Musetti was trying to do it. And in the tiebreak, for example, second set tiebreak, Musetti only made one effective return the entire tiebreak. And when I say effective return, I'm just saying, get to neutral. Get to neutral. And he only did that once. He actually did more than get to neutral. He hit a stunning forehand return down the line that forced an error. But on all the others, Alcaraz either had free points or attacks on that first ball where he was able to win the point swiftly. And here's the thing. If Musetti were to move up, Alcaraz is not going to blow serves by him. It's a handleable first serve if you force yourself to move up in the court. Musetti does have some challenges with his one-handed backhand if he's going to move up. Doesn't have the ideal time off that wing. Doesn't want to chip against Alcaraz on clay. That seems like a terrible idea as well. So I'm not saying the solution's easy, but I am going to say if you look at the way Alcaraz was hugging the baseline and going to town on Musetti's second serve, in contrast to what Musetti was able to do against Alcaraz's serve from his deep position, it was a really big difference there. Alcaraz against one-handed backhands on clay is now 18-1. The one loss is against Musetti. Hamburg, 2022. I continue to think it's a really tough ask. I said this in the Madrid preview when I really, I had my concerns about Alcaraz at that point in time. Didn't know he was going to pull out. Didn't want to pick him to win his quarter at all. And then I'm like, man, Tsitsipas, Musetti, Shapo. I'm like, is a one-handed backhand beating him on clay? And I just couldn't pick that. So I picked him into the semis. He ended up withdrawing. But yeah, I just think defending against Alcaraz's forehand for a one-hander on clay, defending against his kick serve for a one-hander on clay, I think it is a rough ask. If it's windy like it was today, even worse. And the match point is a good example. Alcaraz hits one heavy, deep forehand down the line, and you can see Musetti he simply can't drive this ball. He doesn't have the time. He's too rushed on it, so he has to slice. And off the slice, on a clay court, Alcaraz basically hits he treats it like a sitter. And the ball has decent depth, but it looks like a sitter for Alcaraz. He essentially hits an eyes-closed winner, forehand inside out on this match point. Musetti has no chance for it. Maybe on grass, that slice comes through the court a bit more. On clay, it checks up, it sits up, and Alcaraz is such a great pace generator, even from a low contact point. It's just lights out. So you can't really slice against Alcaraz, but it's tough to drive the ball when you're dealing with that really heavy ball on the clay, jumping up high off the court. So tough. 18-1. Alcaraz against one-handed backhands on clay courts. By the way, shout out to Musetti. He beat a really good version of Zverev, and he did that because in conditions where power was not being rewarded, power was not winning points. Musetti had ways to open up space on the court. He had ways to finish despite those conditions. Zverev simply did not have those answers. He did not possess those answers. So to watch Musetti be able to maneuver the ball around the court with short angles and drop shots and excellent net play, and Zverev continued to just try to power the ball through the court, not going to happen against Musetti in those slow conditions. It was... Zverev actually played really well, just not in the right way against what Musetti was able to bring to the table. He was not the better player, Zverev. And also shout out to Tommy Paul. Back-to-back Rome semifinals. That's worthy of some real respect. Might earn him a place in the power rankings. I don't know. I haven't gone through it all. I don't know. Just throwing it out there. And with that, let us get to the Alcaraz-Sinner head-to-head in earnest. We'll start by talking about the history between these two. It's 6-4 Alcaraz. And Sinner head-to-heads can be misleading. This one is actually not misleading. The reason Sinner head-to-heads can be misleading is because he became a completely different player fall of 2022. Like, you can draw basically a line in the sand. There's Sinner pre-fall of 2022. Sorry, I'm actually a year early. 2023, I mean. There's Sinner pre-fall of 2023, and then there's post-fall of 2023. And statistically, and I mean, anybody who has followed the sport over that period of time, we just know how different those Jannik Sinners were. Even though maybe, he did win Canada before then, so you started to see things turning. He played a good match against Zverev at the U.S. Open before then. You started to see some things start to shift for him, but it was just a different guy after that. But point being, since fall of 2023, Alcaraz leads the head-to-head 3-1. There was somewhat of a debate last year. I'm just going to mention it. Somewhat of a debate about the Six Kings exhibition and whether or not that matters, whether or not that counts for something, if that's meaningful at all. And I am adamant that it does not. And I will say that about any exhibition, regardless of how much money is on the line. I'm adamant that it does not actually mean much. I don't think it'll mean much in the head of Alcaraz and the head of Sinner. And I think they put some effort into that match, no doubt. But there's a difference between effort and true official meaning. Now, let's get into last year's meetings. I mentioned at the top of the show, Alcaraz won all three outside of that exhibition. Beijing was the highest level match of the year for my money. Alcaraz, in my view, capitalized on a pretty significant physical advantage at both Indian Wells and Roland Garros. That is to say that by the end of the match, Alcaraz was moving way better than Sinner. And I thought that was a huge deal in both of the matches. There are circumstances surrounding that, but we don't need to get into all of that. The point is, Alcaraz had more legs in those matches, and that was really key in the end. At Indian Wells, the high spinny ball gave Sinner a lot of trouble. At Roland Garros, Jannik fixed it. He moved up on the ball. He forced himself to take it early, to take it on the rise instead of moving back. That basically fixed the issue for him. I didn't think that the high spinny ball was an issue for Jannik in Paris, even though Alcaraz won the match again. But the thing I noticed at both Roland Garros and Beijing, both Alcaraz's, the latter two Alcaraz wins of the year, is that Carlos's attacking was more venomous, was more proactive, was more creative, and that made a real difference. Well, Beijing was a scalding hot forehand day for Alcaraz. And he made some absurdly difficult plays up at the net in the clutch. And oftentimes you look at a lot of what happened in Beijing and you think, Sinner did nothing wrong there. He did absolutely nothing wrong. But there's this, general sentiment around, and I think there's a lot of truth to it, that Alcaraz's A++ level is better than anything that Sinner can get to, even though Sinner might be at a higher base level. And I think the reason we feel that way about Alcaraz is because when he is fully confident, he is the more proactive attacker and the more deadly, lethal attacker as far as making something happen out of nothing, which Alcaraz has the ability to do. And he did a lot of that. I felt that Sinner, he thrives in neutral. He is the best in the world in neutral. But he was allowing Alcaraz to throw the first punch too often in those matches particularly by playing into Alcaraz's forehand neutrally too often. And I thought that was putting him behind in some of these matches, because Alcaraz's level, you talk about his ups and downs and what his A+ is versus what his regular is. Well, he had his A+ against Sinner last year. And that's why it wasn't going to be good enough necessarily, even if you're Sinner and you're rock solid and you're defending well and you're not making a lot of mistakes. Alcaraz was taking. He was creating. And those were my kind of big picture takeaways from those matches. One other note, Alcaraz lost the first set in all three of those matches. He had to come from behind, all three. I have way more goodies about this head-to-head, stats and trends and such, but I'm going to save them for Monday. Let's see if they continue. If they do, I might mention them. If they reverse course, I might mention them on Monday Match Analysis, right? Okay, Alcaraz Keys. Alcaraz path to victory. Well, first of all, and this is always true for the guy who's won the last three, you got to keep doing what you're doing. And what is that? That is being the disruptor in the matchup. Look, nobody trades ground strokes moving left and right better than Sinner. But what Alcaraz does is he breaks up the rhythm of these rallies. And he doesn't always have to do it with height and spin like he did at Indian Wells. Or, he can use backhand slice. He can mix stuff up with the variety. Drop shots, net rushing. That's a big deal as far as Alcaraz's finishing is concerned, he does these things better than Sinner. Jannik has learned to be competent in these areas, but Alcaraz is a natural in these areas. He can also do it with brute force, right? In Beijing, Alcaraz was a disruptor. He was the disruptive player, but it wasn't about variety. It was about Mach 6 on the forehand, right? So however it comes for Alcaraz, it's about figuring out ways to do very proactive damage and break up Sinner's comfort level, essentially forcing him to play defense. I mean, look, that's the goal against most players. The thing is, with Sinner, it just becomes... I mean, I guess the difference, right? Because, of course, Alcaraz wants to make every player play defense. I guess the difference is he's in more trouble against Sinner when he's trading versus against other guys. Now, clay helps his cause. Let's talk about that. Offensively, it gives his forehand the best opportunity to be the most deadly ground stroke on the court. I think generally when Alcaraz beats Sinner, Alcaraz's forehand is the best shot on the court. It's the biggest shot on the court, most certainly. And the clay just offers up Alcaraz that extra time. And it doesn't do a lot to slow down that forehand because he not only gets that express pace, he gets the heavy RPM. He is just, the best generator there is off of that wing. Now, defensively, I think the clay is even more important for Alcaraz because what Sinner fundamentally does at the most basic level, and this is the most comfortable part of Sinner's game. The thing he does in his sleep is rush opponents on the other side of the net. That's what he does with his eyes closed. And if the clay can slow down the pace a little bit for Alcaraz, defensively, he can absorb Jannik's pace better. That's trouble for Sinner because as soon as Sinner needs to go to the other stuff, if Sinner feels like he can't power the ball through the court and he can't force Alcaraz into errors just by playing the ball deep, hard, heavy, well, now you're relying on the other stuff. The drop shots, the volleys, the angles that are all good for Sinner, but good is less than great, right? Alcaraz's defense will turn a lot of points around if the conditions are going to slow the ball down enough where the straight line power doesn't bother Alcaraz, that he's able to absorb those blows and take those blows. And that's going to be a key thing to look out for. Can Sinner force errors into big targets against Alcaraz's defense? Or will the power knock Alcaraz off balance? Will he be able to force errors off of Alcaraz's racket? I'm not talking about winners, that's going to be key. And the clay is going to help Alcaraz make sure that's not the case. We'll see. It still might be the case, but the clay is gonna tilt things in Carlos's direction. Now let's talk about the Sinner path. Well, look, the correction that I think he needs to make, and this is a similar theme to what I was just talking about in terms of the pace of play and how clay will affect things. What Jannik ultimately needs to do differently, in my opinion, than Roland Garros and Beijing is he needs to keep the pace a little bit higher. Like, he needs to make sure that Alcaraz is rushed and isn't content to play neutral into Alcaraz's forehand. Like, that's where Sinner keeps getting hurt, playing neutral into Alcaraz's forehand. Jannik is patient. Jannik is disciplined. Jannik is poised. The risk level and the ground stroke speed level, he needs to bump it up, I think, compared to where he was at last year against Alcaraz. And just make sure that Carlos is not able to to feel comfortable attacking off of those rally balls as often. How do you make sure that Alcaraz is not comfortable attacking off the rally balls? Look, you got to hit him harder. You just got to hit him harder. So pace does matter for Jannik Sinner. How else can Sinner get the first punch in rallies? Well, let's talk about a pattern that I think we need to see from him. I think Sinner's best shot all throughout the tournament has been his backhand down the line in Rome. I feel like that's been his best shot. Well, in order to find the backhand down the line, he needs to get to Alcaraz's backhand early. As soon as Carlos is in the middle of the court hitting a forehand, from that position, it's hard to get to his backhand again. Because now he is injecting damage, likely on that next ball. And he's so quick with his footwork. He's so quick to get up to the net. He's so quick to drop shot off the short ball. Like suddenly you've lost your ability to play through his backhand. So you got to get there early. Some of that is down to good returning, right? Once you get to Alcaraz's backhand, now you get the cross court. Sinner needs to, and I think once they're in that cross court backhand and backhand, Sinner changes down the line better than Alcaraz. And like in that cross court, I think Jannik has the ability to apply more pressure with depth and pace and consistency. And he draws the short ball more often in that cross court. If you draw the short ball more often, it gives you the opportunity to actually change that pattern down the line. So I think get to Alcaraz's backhand, get that change down the line. Now, if you haven't won the point outright with the backhand down the line, you're still getting an attacking forehand on the next ball. Alcaraz is playing forehand defense. Maybe it's chip, maybe it's drive, but it's probably middle of the court or cross court. And now Sinner can attack with his forehand, which is ideal. Okay. I mean, as much as he wants the backhand and backhand exchange, the finishing blow is more often than not going to be the forehand. It's about how do we get to the forehand? And I think the path to that is mostly Sinner's backhand down the line. So to me, that's the pattern. The other question for Sinner, can the return take over? Is there a chance that Sinner can simply take over with his return of serve? Because we've seen Alcaraz punished for a lack of serve precision by some opponents in the past, including Sinner in patches at times in this head-to-head, but certainly not always. I actually thought first set Roland Garros match, Alcaraz's first serve kind of got manhandled. That obviously changed as the match progressed. But like Jannik needs to be, certainly Jannik is taking a look at, and Darren Cahill and Simona Vagnozzi, well, what has been bothering Alcaraz in his recent losses? And I've been saying this, to me, what's been bothering Alcaraz is being rushed on the +1 because opponents are being super offensive on their return of serve. And Sinner obviously has the skill set to execute that. I mean, he is so good at driving returns at end range. I mentioned already his aggressive return position, which contributes to taking away time. Now, it is a clay court, and that gives Alcaraz some options, most certainly, particularly with the kicking first serve that is going to be effective on the surface, potentially, just to get the ball out of Sinner's strike zone. And I think mixing in the body serve is something that Tommy Paul did really well in the first set against Roland Garros, in the semifinal against Roland Garros. Man, what am I talking about? So the body serve is something that Alcaraz can look to, potentially, and it's something that he likes to hit a lot. The problem is sometimes he misses his spot on the body serve, and now you have a really horrendous serve when you miss your spot on a body serve. So, I just think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch out for. And if Sinner wins this match, I bet we're looking at some service breaks where he's hitting some very stifling returns in which Alcaraz is completely suffocated on the +1 and has no time to hit out on the ball and just doesn't have a chance to, is basically defending right away on his serve points. All right. Let's get to the prediction. So, first of all, I haven't talked about the crowd. This match is in Rome. Let me just put this on the table. I'm not convinced it makes a huge difference. Now, I'll be watching these players How's their effort level? How's their focus level? How's their body language? How's their positivity? Like, I'll watch for all these things, and I'll try to discern, like, maybe the crowd is having some kind of effect. But coming into the match, I'm just not convinced. Look, some players lift with the home crowd. Some players wilt because it's extra pressure, and pressure is poison for the majority of tennis players. Sinner, he's won in Turin. He's been completely immune to pressure in the last 2 years, basically. So I certainly don't think that Sinner is going to be overwhelmed by this occasion. But I also think that Jannik is locked in no matter where he's playing. He doesn't need to be playing in Italy to be locked in. He's not Hugo Humbert in France, where like his personality is completely different in his home country, right? Then for Alcaraz, like, I just think he's seasoned enough and mature enough to know exactly what's coming his way and just, be able to keep his head down and do his thing mentally. I don't think it's going to get to him. So that's my thoughts on the crowd. Now, not an easy prediction. Not easy to pick here. But in order for Sinner to use his consistency advantage that he theoretically has in this head-to-head, he needs to be able to stay in points with his movement. And I think Alcaraz is looking quicker around the court. And I don't know that Sinner has been able to convince me. And I think, in most of his matchups up to this point, he has been the one in attack more often than not. He has been playing the bully ball more often than not. I mean, certainly not in the first set against Tommy, to an extent. But I don't think he's looking quick enough to defend consistently against Alcaraz's clay court attacking skill set. In other words, I question his ability to extend rallies to the point where his consistency advantage is fully being fleshed out, which I think is so crucial for him to do. I think Alcaraz is going to win it with his legs again. I think the movement is the difference right now. To me, he's just looking to be moving a little bit better. And the serve return dynamic is another area that I do think Jannik in certain conditions can get on top of that. But I don't know if he's going to be able to ride that on clay. Plus, look, the extra time on Alcaraz's forehand, which I do think is a really big deal in this matchup. So I think what Sinner needs to do, like in Beijing, on a hard court, a slow hard court, by the way, but a hard court, Sinner didn't rush Alcaraz's forehand enough, and I thought that was a mistake, and I think that Sinner will recognize that, and I think he has a chance to correct that. But if you're going to correct that, boy, I mean, you don't want to be on clay. You want to have quicker conditions in order to correct that, most certainly. I do think there's some truth to the idea that Alcaraz's A-plus level is a little bit higher despite the unbelievable run of form that Sinner is in. And he tends to bring that A-plus level in finals. He has, as of late, brought that level against Sinner. He, as of late, has brought that level on a clay court. I feel like enough things line up for Alcaraz to get the better of Jannik Sinner and end this incredible win streak that Jannik is on. So I am predicting Carlos Alcaraz in 3. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.